Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning and welcome to Lincoln University and the Food and Fibre Futures workshop today. We're going to start our day with karakia. This karakia is kimikia rukuhia. It's about seeking clarity and wisdom and knowledge to emerge into clarity, which is the hope for the workshop today. So it gathers us in the work and makes us think about what we're doing here today. And you are welcome to join us in this karakia. Kimahia rakuhia. Whaia ki te uru tupunui o tāne. Tāne te waiora. Tāne te wanaka. Tāne te tokoraki. Puta ki te whaio ki te ao marama. Tu te kana. Tu te maraka. Te tuhi te rama. E noho te matara nei. E roko whakaihaya ake ki ruka. Kia tina, tina, huie, tomie, huie. So we are here to connect. We're here to collaborate on the future of Selwyn's food and fibre sector. We're here to contribute your ideas. So you will have seen the agenda, you will have seen the fantastic speakers that are lined up for today. And you'll have also seen the chunk in the middle of the day where we are asking you to do the work. That is the point, not for us to speak at you all day, but for you to say what you would like to see in the future for the future of Selwyn. And it's also to identify opportunities that you might take away from here, both in terms of networking, ideas and collaboration. And you'll see a postcard on your tables. We'll refer to these a few times during the day. These are your notes to yourself. One of the things that you've identified is that networking is important to you as a sector. And so we're going to ask you at different points during the day to fill out these postcards, leave them with us, and we will send that to you as a reminder at the end of the day. So for the people who had questions about postcards. So given that today's work is not about us, it's about you who is here. We've got almost around 100 people in the room right now. So if we just have a quick show of hands, who here is from the Selwyn region? Who is joining us from outside Selwyn? Okay. Who here works in a business or commercial enterprise in the food and fibre sector? Who is in a supporting industry to the food and fibre sector? Who here works in policy or government? Right, or council? Who here works at, welcome, who here works at a university? This university. Who here works at the other one? Welcome. Thanks for making the drive out here today. Who here is optimistic for the future of Selwyn? Who here is worried for the future of Selwyn? Who here feels a bit of both? Okay, who here is an extrovert? Who here is an introvert? Well, we are going to make you sit on these tables and work all day, so we'll be quite drained by the end of it. What else do I have on my list? Oh, that's it. Okay, so that's who we are here. Before we get started, obviously some health and safety. We are not expecting any alarms today, so any drills. So if you hear the alarm, it is a real evacuation. The nearest exits may be behind you. Please count the number of rows. We will be out this door onto the lawn outside. Who knows what that lawn is called? Forbes. It's Forbes Lawn. Why is it called Forbes Lawn? Is it named after?
One of the least effective Prime Ministers New Zealand ever had.
Prime Minister from 1930 to 1935, whose name was
Forbes.
Forbes. Yes, George William Forbes. And he was one of the founders of, well, he was a Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he pushed for the what we now know as Lincoln University, at the time Canterbury Agricultural College, to be here on this site in Selwyn. And it's just interesting 90 years later to go, we're still here gathering, thinking about what is important for the sector, and that's food and fibre agriculture. So that's evacuations, morning tea and afternoon tea. No, sorry, Morning tea and lunch will be out in the foyer. We don't have any food or drink in this room. I'm sure you've been told already. And bathrooms are also just out here. Feel free to leave through these doors at any point. We're not going to make you sit there with your legs closed for the day until it starts. Any questions before we begin? Alrighty. So we are going to get started with our work for the day. For that, I'm going to introduce my co-host for the day. Hello, my name's Alana. I forgot to do that. Very poor start to facilitation. I am here with Lincoln University. I also work separately with Shared Science, and my only job here today is to make sure that you are feeling good, that you are feeling productive, and that we get to where we need to be by 2:30 in this at the end of the day. So that's my job. Step back, I'd like to introduce Wim de Koning. Who knows Wim already? Yes. So Wim is the Director for Strategic Partnerships here at Lincoln University and co-director of the Centre of Excellence, Centre of Excellence in Transformative Agribusiness. As you're wondering, you might have been wondering this, he comes to us from the Netherlands via the UK, but is now based in Selwyn and has been here for quite some time. And that means he's got significant understanding and practical experience in what we need to do for a successful contribution to a global value supply chain. Yes, so he is going to get us started with an overview of the project. Then we'll move into some speakers, we'll have morning tea, and then the work for you begins. So please welcome Wim.
Thank you very much, Alana. I got some tips here what to put on my CV because that sounded really good. So, Wim de Koning, welcome to Lincoln University. Welcome to the Selwyn District. My job this morning is to basically set the scene, and then I'll help you with introducing the speakers and moderate the Q&As. So after every session, we will have a Q&A session. So unless you have something that you want to have clarified, all the questions will be done after the presentations. So this morning, before morning tea, we have 4 presentations. Myself setting the scene, and then we have 3 experts talking about the food and fiber sector in Selwyn and the future thereof. This is not something that we're doing alone. We're doing this in collaboration with Selwyn District Council. And they recognize how important the food and fiber sector is for the Selwyn District, and therefore they've asked the ARRU to actually come up with a report on the current status, run some scenarios, talk to stakeholders within the Selwyn District what they think about the food and fiber sector here in the district. This work would have been presented by Professor Alan Renwick. Unfortunately, he is in the UK. So I'm going to present this work. We have a couple of the researchers, I think all 3 of them, so Mike, Paul, and Mike are actually in the room. So my strategy is if you have any difficult questions about this, keep them for the Q&A and we'll ask the experts. Like I said, the context of what I'm going to talk about is very much in the economic development plan of the Selwyn District. I have a printed version here, but the digital version is available on the Selwyn Futures website. As you can see on screen, it is very much embedded in there. Farming in the future, work-ready workforce. So it is already in the strategy. But where are we? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. So we're going to talk about what is the food and fiber sector in Selwyn. We're going to look at some modeling. Where would the future look like? Although probably nobody can predict the future. If they do, please come to me in the coffee break because I would love to know the lotto numbers for this weekend. Then we're going to talk about some interviews because most of you were interviewed by the research team, and we'll talk about that, and then I'll hand over, and then we'll have some speakers, and then in the afternoon I'll hand over to, or later this morning I'll hand over to Alana for the workshop. Food and fiber sector in Selwyn. Where is it? This is 2025, and as you can see, there are two things there. There's food and fiber production, and there's food and fiber processing. Food and fiber production is basically what happens on farm. So whether it's horticulture, whether it's dairying, whether it's sheep and beef, that is the production part. Then the food and fiber processing is basically the part thereafter. So we take the raw materials from those farms, from those producing units, and we're actually from those production units, and actually start making high quality and high value food out of that. So the total food and fiber industry in the Selwyn District is about 22% of all the businesses that there are in Selwyn. And coincidentally, it is the same with the number of employees. So it's about 22% of the people that work and live in Selwyn District are involved within the food and fiber sector. If we then look at the GDP and how important is the food and fiber production, so this is again on farm, and what we basically see is that over the last 5 years we have a growth of about 5% recorded. The biggest growth in money-wise was dairy. It grew by about 52 million, and what percentage-wise we saw that fishing and aquaculture and forestry and logging were growing as well, 31 and 32 and 21% respectively.
Excuse me.
No.
I am Jess.
This was a few moments, because it means that the speaker of this afternoon arrived as well. So that is really important, right? If we then look at employment, we don't see the same. Employment in the food and fiber sector on the production side decreased by about 2% over the last 5 years. And the reductions were mainly in sheep and beef, and about 8%, and horticulture minus 8% as well. When we then look at the services that are support services that are provided to those on farms, that actually grew by 12%. So there's definitely some things going on farm as well. If we then look at the processing side, so they take the material from the farm, and we're actually going to look at processing. We basically see that the sector increased by almost 6.5% over the last 5 years. Not surprisingly, the largest GDP growth was in dairy, with about $9 million. And fastest growth was reported in wood products, about 30% plus, and meat product manufacturing, about 23%. But as you can already gather, that dairy remains the largest GDP contributor in the Selwyn District, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. Similarly, if we look at employment within the processing sector, we see an overall growth of 12% within the last 5 years. And again, the biggest growth is in the dairy sector and dairy product manufacturing, and wood and meat is closely behind them in percentage, but not in absolute numbers. You already gathered that dairy is really important in the Selwyn District. So if you look at GDP exports, we basically see that more than 80% of our exports are dairy products. So when we later on go into the different modeling, you will basically see that dairying will feature there as well. And the reason for that is that dairy is so important for our local economy. In 2024, you talk about $2.1 billion of exports going from the Selwyn District. Mainly dairy products, followed by fruits, cereals, other products. But again, as you can see, in the graph, they are relatively, well, I wouldn't say dwarfed, but definitely less than the dairy sector. So if we actually look at what is the contribution of the sector to the district, if I then take the direct contribution together, so this is the primary sector. So this is what I called production in the previous slides, about $740 million. And if I then add the processing there, you talk about $1.1 billion. But you also see the 26% below here. Remember when we talked about how many people and how many businesses are in the Selwyn District, that we basically said, well, about 22% of the businesses and 22% of the employees. Well, these 22% are delivering 26% of the direct GDP of Selwyn District. So the food and fiber sector is definitely pulling its weight within the sector, within the district. If we then take the indirect with us as well, and that is basically activities where suppliers to the sector are basically coming up with things like fertilizer, machinery, transport, energy. You suddenly see that it jumps to almost more than $1.4 billion. If we then make it even larger, and we say, well, let's look at the purchase power of all the people that work in the direct part, and what money do they spend in the district, you basically come to a $1.7 billion contribution in the Selwyn to the Selwyn GDP in 2025. So that is about 41% of our economy, of our GDP, is either direct or indirect connected to the food and fiber sector. So it's not surprising when the Selwyn District Council and leadership really likes to hero that sector. It has its challenges, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. So that's why Selwyn District asked the AREU to do a little bit more research and some modeling. All the figures that I'm talking to you about, and also the contributions that you will have later on this morning, will all be compiled in a report, which will be publicly available from the Selwyn District website, hopefully relatively soon after this session. I would say the next 3-4 weeks, something like that. Something like that. And otherwise you can blame me that I overpromised. So we're going to talk about scenarios and land use modeling. If we look into the future, and at the moment we're looking at dairy conversions, for example, if we're going to do that, that has influence on how we use our land. We are growing our population, that will have influence on the use of our land. And how we can actually start to model that is basically start creating scenarios. Scenarios are just stories about the future. There is nothing that will actually say that it will actually happen, simply due to the fact that we cannot predict the future. But to our best of our knowledge, we're trying to figure out, okay, if we're going to model this, and if we're going to look at the land use change, and if we're going to look at different activities, what type of competencies do we need here in the Selwyn District to make sure that we have a viable future? Right? So that's where it becomes really interesting. So potential drivers of change will be population growth. We already talked about that, right? So we probably go from about 80,000 people in the Selwyn District at the moment to in 20 years' time to double that. Land use change. Everybody's talking about dairy conversions. Fun fact: the university is actually converting a dairy farm into an arable unit. So there you go. It can go the other way around as well. And changing consumer demands, especially with prices being important, people will make different choices when they purchase. Different market signals. Well, I don't have to talk to you about the geopolitical situation at the moment. Government policy. We see that there is a different interpretation from one side of the aisle to the other side of the aisle when it comes to government policy here in New Zealand. Climate events, we don't have to talk to you about that, right? Look at the weather events up north. They're real. They're there. Environmental drivers. So international companies basically putting restrictions on us and basically say, yeah, we would love to have your product, but it needs to comply to these rules. And trade arrangements. So will the trade deal with India actually give us an extra boost here for so? Who knows? So these are the potential drivers, and those potential drivers were basically put into models. We used two models. We used linear programming, and Mike actually did that when we actually going to look at the land use, and then they looked at the 2A model and to actually see, okay, what would be the effects on that, on the environment, on the economy, and on the social parts of this. Again, I'm not an expert in this. I have the experts in the room, so yeah, all your difficult questions are still welcome. 4 scenarios. So what we did here is we basically looked at things that could say, well, with a certain amount of certainty, this could very well be a future. We looked at reduced greenhouse gases. So this is taking the Paris Agreement in consideration, right? So we're just looking at the Paris Agreement, and that is the driver behind that model. We're looking at diminishing markets for dairy products, a potential risk, alternative proteins, especially a couple of years ago. So we basically, and because we're so dependent on the dairy industry here in Selwyn, we basically picked that scenario as well. The third scenario is low input farming. So can we actually do dairy with less inputs, and how would that actually look like? And then scenario 4 is export intensification. So here we look at MPI basically saying, listen, we want you to double export values. And since the majority of this of the GDP of Selwyn District is export orientated, this again is a very valid one. As you can see when we run through this, these scenarios, and the question is, okay, what competency do we need to have? We basically figured out that when we first ran the scenarios, it was business as usual. And then we actually put in a technology part in that as well, and those will be the second part of the scenarios that I'm going to show you. So if you talk about land use change, again, basically what you see is there's, and I've put in red the reductions. So total land in Selwyn District is not going to change. It's going to stay the same, right? So whatever we do. But the different scenarios are basically forcing different activities within the food and fiber sector. And that's what is reflecting in this table. Again, is that going to tell us much? Well, we know that if we want to reduce greenhouse gases, we probably by planting trees we could do that. So that's why you see those shifts. The interesting bit actually comes when we actually look at the different scenarios, and we actually look at the impacts they have on revenue, gross margin, CO2 emissions, and the actual economic impact on employment and risks. And what we see here is that in scenario 1, reduced greenhouse gases, we put in the model minus 100% CO2 emissions. That is because that scenario basically says that we need to be net zero according to the Paris Agreement. You see that the other ones are basically giving us different numbers. So within that scenario, we're definitely not reaching that. Some of the risks levels: environmental risk, economic risk, and social risks. And the social risks is basically, do we have enough people to actually work in our sector? And as you can see, if we do business as usual, that's probably okay, right? So we have the workforce that actually could deliver on these scenarios. But are we really happy with these numbers? Nah. So what can we actually do to create competencies that we are actually more successful into the future? The team that did the modeling basically came up, well, we need to start putting technology in there. So here you talk about genetic improvements and different forms of agri-tech. We really need that. That is also the reason why this afternoon, after lunch, we have 3 speakers heroing the tech side. Because we truly believe that technology, whether it's a robot or whether it's genetics or whether it's a smarter way, of looking at your farming business, will really basically give us an edge. And what we've done as well is we basically in all these scenarios we put a net zero CO2 in there as well. And as you can basically see, the numbers, especially in scenario 3 and 4, look pretty hopeful. The one that I'm gonna point out is the social risk high. Do we currently have the employees in our district to basically deliver on the higher technology demand in our farming systems and in our processing systems? The answer is, well, maybe, but maybe not. So in other words, there is definitely future focus for us as a knowledge institute, but also for you and the Selwyn District to figure out how we can create that talent pipeline. We talked to a lot of you in the room already, and this was really cool because what we actually did was we talked to you about the current business, your linkages to the district, what you think about the future growth opportunities, the key challenges, barriers, and risks. And it's so interesting because some of you saw an item as a risk or as a barrier, while others of you in the room actually mentioned exactly the same thing and said, no, it's an opportunity. So it is really not black and white, but overall sentiment, and very much like when I saw the hands this morning as well, it's pretty okay. And so we really have a positive attitude here in the Selwyn District. Some of the things that you talked about, opportunities and challenges, labor. I was in a workforce meeting with Selwyn District Council, and there it was very evident that some businesses are really struggling to get appropriate labor, where other industries are like really easy getting the labor they want. Dairy conversions. Well, you could probably argue that Fonterra and Sinlay think this is an opportunity. This is really good. The arable sector is probably going to say, right? So, both sides of the story. Infrastructure. Do we have enough processing facilities? Do we have enough roads? Do we have enough schools? And if we're going to grow as districts, where are we going to put all of those people? At the moment, about 40% of our land is dairy, about 5% is arable, and about 1% is, by the way, 22% is nature and shrub. So that's also a big part of our district, and about 1% is residential. If we need to double our population, then probably that will go to 2%, unless we do something really smart and start building vertical rather than horizontal, and many more things. But these are just preliminary results. I don't want to take away from the discussions that you will have later this morning. One of the things that you said, and this was really loud for almost every one of the persons that we interviewed. We need to start networking. We need to start figuring out if you have a labor excess, we have a labor shortage. Can we actually start talking together? Can we actually do this? So networking was one of the things that you indicated that you wanted. So definitely make sure that you know the people that are on your table. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to put my other hat on. So now I'm the facilitator again, and I want to introduce Dr. Jolin. And I'm also very proud that he's an adjunct professor here at the university. He's the Director of Science from the Plant and Food Research Group, part of the Bioscience Institute, headquartered here in the Selwyn District, and I think we should be really proud of that. And today, Jolin will discuss how food assurance, traceability, sustainable credentials are shaping competitive advantage in the international market. Please join me in welcoming Jolin.
Very nice to meet you all this morning. So I'm Jolin Fibre, Director of Science in the very newly formed Bioeconomy Science Institute. And yes, as mentioned, also have adjunct professor roles here at Lincoln University and the University of Canterbury. So today I'd like to talk about future foods, but with a particular focus on assurance standards and global market access. As a bit of an overview, first of all, just going to provide a bit of context. When we talk about the bioeconomy, what are we talking about? And also use that opportunity just to introduce very briefly the Bioeconomy Science Institute. Then look at the changing world and why future foods really matter to us here in New Zealand. Talk through the 4 pillars of modern trade from this viewpoint, and then really the key message that would be great if we could all take home today is that essentially when we think about the foods of the future that we need to make, trust is really the product that we're selling and making. So a bit of context first, the New Zealand bioeconomy. Essentially, there's all sorts of definitions of bioeconomy, but you could think of it as essentially we produce biomass, plants, animals, etc. And it's the products that we make from that biomass and how we sell them around the world is the bioeconomy. Now, from a New Zealand context, this is an absolutely critical part of the New Zealand economy, particularly the export economy. So in 2025, $60 billion of export revenue, 82.5% of all the goods that New Zealand exported, 12.4% of employment and 10% of our overall GDP. And of course, within that context here in Canterbury, a very significant contributor to that. As I mentioned, just to briefly introduce myself and the institute I represent, very newly formed, called the New Zealand Institute of Bioeconomy Science. It's a merger of plant and food research, ag research, Manaki Whenua land care and Scion, and also aspects of Callaghan biotechnology is probably coming across as well in the New Zealand Food Innovation Network, merged together into one large government-owned research organisation, annual revenue of $500 million, $500 million, and more than 2,300 employees, locations right across the country from Kirikiri down to Clyde, and also have staff in Australia and the US as well. So quite a significant research organisation that's really here to support the New Zealand bioeconomy. So the sectors represented also give a different perspective of that context of what is the bioeconomy. A whole range of sectors represented that have been touched on by our first speaker today. So from a future foods perspective, particularly noting the dairy, meat and wool, food and ingredients, and seafood, arable, horticulture, etc. aspects. But also increasingly an emphasis on advanced manufacturing and high-tech industries as well. So future foods. First thing to really note is that the global food landscape is really changing significantly. So this is a really interesting graph. It shows the projected population increase for the world from 2020 to 2050 and projected a 25% increase in the global population. However, the increase in food demand significantly outstrips that. So over that same time period, projected 55% growth in food demand. And that's driven from a change in diets and income, particularly across Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, etc. So the world is already very hungry for food, and that is going to increasingly be the case. So very high demand for food. Now, of course, in New Zealand, with a population of just 5 million or so, it's estimated we feed about 40 million of the globe's population at the moment. That's about how much food we can make. And of course, we're geographically very separated from most of the markets that we send our food into. So really, opportunity here is to target those premium consumers in the premium high value markets. That's what I'll be focusing on today. So why do future foods matter right now? So I've just mentioned the growing demand for food, but it's not just the food itself. So consumers expect it to be delicious, to look good, to be nutritious, all those kind of things. So the what, if you like, of the food. But increasingly, and this is expected to become more and more the case, we've actually got a whole lot of other expectations from the consumer, particularly those high value consumers. So they want to know not just what the food is, but how it's being produced. What's the provenance? And is that a credible provenance? The environmental impact of the food, how were the animals treated? And increasingly also not willing to just believe whatever they're told. So we also need authenticity and verification of these kind of credentials. Then when you layer on that increasing regulations around the world, so actually getting into markets is getting increasingly difficult with the regulations. And then layer on top of that climate change, biosecurity shocks, geopolitical disruption, increasingly like right now, but also increasingly in the future, it's going to be very important to have credible food assurance systems for all the food that we produce. So that growing scrutiny on not just what the food is, that's kind of taken as a given, but how it's made. So for a country like New Zealand, really trust is the key differentiator. So in the past, we would have often thought about food from the perspective of it needs to be safe. So safe in this case meaning absence of harm. It's not going to hurt anybody. And therefore a focus on identifying hazards, complying with food safety regulations, a recall process, etc. That is no longer sufficient. So today and on into the future, food assurance is really what we're talking about. That includes food safety and everything to do with food safety, but also has layers of integrity referring to all those different aspects I mentioned, the provenance, environmental impact, etc., and sustainability. And so the focus for our food production needs to be around whole systems, holistic approach, and transparency in the production and across the value chain. So in a sense, in the theme of trust that we're talking about today, the trust starts at the farm or on the orchard and travels with the product right through to the consumer. But sometimes modern food trade is reference to these 4 pillars. So first of all, standards and certifications, then food assurance frameworks, traceability and data systems. I'm going to talk briefly through each of these 3. And then if these first three pillars are strong, then you've got an opportunity to have the 4th pillar, which is market access and particularly price premiums in high value markets. But you've got to get the first 3 increasingly stronger and stronger. First of all, standards, sometimes called the new trade language. This is basically your basic expectations of any given market or any given production area of how the food is going to be made and what it needs to be. So here in New Zealand, we have the Food Standards Australia-New Zealand framework. But of course, if you're a food producer exporting, we need to understand the market's standards that we're going into in the different sectors and aspects. And this can be a really complex minefield and constantly changing as well in terms of those standards. Then on top of that, we have retailer requirements. So someone like Harrods, for example, who will, to get your product into their shelves, you'll need additional verification and different credentials on top of that as well. So it's quite a difficult area, but basically you could just think of this as your ticket to play. This basically is, you can sell foods if you meet these standards. But as I mentioned, really to maintain and strengthen our access to premium markets, we've got to go beyond that to the food assurance area. So in practice, this can mean a lot of different things, but we have on-farm assurance, which is essentially the concept of integrated quality system. So you're considering all those different aspects, your animal welfare, the social and community impact of your food production, climate, environmental expectations, biodiversity, water stewardship. And then, as mentioned earlier, that's got to be verified, have some kind of evidence-based credential that you can point to that people will believe. And of course, the same applies across the processing and supply chain right through to the consumer. And that has to be done in a continuous way. However, the benefit, the win of getting this right is that you can have premium brand positioning and long-term reputational value. That third pillar was traceability. And with digital technologies kind of rapidly evolving, as you'll be aware, is becoming increasingly expected. So where it might have been considered a bit of an advantage to have good traceability systems, it's now turned into essentially, it'll be more and more an expectation. So the headline there, essentially in the future, it's going to be increasingly the case that if you can't trace everything, the food right back to where it was produced in a very, very detailed way, you're probably not going to be able to trade it at all, particularly in those premium markets. So in this area, this is about tracing from the farm through to the consumer, digital supply chain systems. We have, as I mentioned, emerging technologies to put blockchain platforms and other kind of AI-driven technologies as well. If you get this right, then it allows you to respond to any regulatory requirements really rapidly, such as food safety issues. It can provide consumer trust and prevent fraud and mislabeling, so that a verified provenance aspect and therefore access to premium markets. I just wanted to divert slightly to talk about a potential emerging technology area, which you may or may not be familiar with, the area of digital twins. This is essentially the concept here of a digital twin, is you have a physical twin. So in the case on the screen here, this is a plain apple orchard with physical trees and actual apples in it. And then you have the other side of the twin is a digital version of that, which has every key aspect of the physical twin incorporated in it. So exact location of every single tree, mapping of all the apples, every single parameter that's going into the management of that orchard. And in a true digital twin, you've got real-time feedback between the physical and the digital aspects, and allows you to have absolute control of the management of that orchard and to be able to make decisions around that to maximise productivity, etc. And also, in terms of the point of today's presentation, to link that through to food assurance systems and traceability. Now, digital twins are being implemented around the world, but at the moment, a lot of it's in kind of the manufacturing sector or supply chain type sector. So it's still in its infancy with regard to kind of horticulture and other kind of food industries. But just flagging in today's presentation, this kind of technology is being developed. It has the potential to be very disruptive, but also to be potentially a big opportunity in terms of New Zealand being a long way from our markets. So opportunities, just zooming out a bit, we're actually in a, I think we can be optimistic. We have a lot of positives. So from a New Zealand perspective, if you look at surveys done around the world, we do actually have a very strong reputation for high quality, safe food in many markets around the world. We are considered to be a leader in sustainable production. It's something we need to ensure we keep. We do currently have access to premium markets, generally speaking, but we can't take that for granted that we can just maintain that without doing anything different. And so generally pulling all that together, something that's made in New Zealand, generally a food has a good trusted provenance story with it. Then in the Canterbury perspective, a lot of benefits here as well. We've got excellent research and education hub, the 2 universities, etc. We've got very innovative producers in this part of New Zealand and very supportive local government. So there's a lot of opportunities for these future foods within Canterbury. So I'm just going to close the presentation by going back to, once again, looking at what the future consumers are going to want and expect. So once again, the consumers of the future, and in fact, many of the consumers now, not looking just at the label, looking beyond the label. So the who, the where, the how, not just the what. And looking for foods that align with their personal values, their beliefs, their ethics, their thoughts about the environment, etc. And align with that easy digital access to product information so that they can verify and feel authenticity. So when we're considering producing food here, we've got to really consider this holistically of how we get that confidence with our consumers. So trust and transparency are absolutely essential, and it's important that we invest in whole systems approach. So away from that traditional approach of a lot of thinking around the product itself, of course that needs to happen as well, but actually look right back across the whole system of the production and enable quality frameworks. So one way to think about this is we treat traceability and sustainability as strategic assets. So in future foods, I guess the key message from today is trust is actually the products that we're selling when we're making those foods.
Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Now we move from a global view to, well, not a low view, but a high view. And High Country Station, Hamish is here to talk to us about what he is doing at High Peak Station and how he looks at caring for the land, his brand story, and he might even talk about trust as well. Hamish, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you for having me down today. It's always hard to follow when you are just a high country farmer and you probably don't get out the farm gate as often as you should. So I'll try and link what I'm here to talk about back into the relevance of today. And I think I've got a few notes here which I'll probably use at the end. But hopefully we'll start with some prettier pictures. But we as a business are looking, I'll explain the business in a minute, but we are looking to add value. And if you put the context of what Vin was saying about doubling export receipts and what John was just saying about trust, that's going to be really important to us and how we start that sort of flow for us as a business. We've got to the point where inputs equal outputs on the farm. The more we put in, the more we'll actually probably run off. So we've got to be careful how we double that value. The river will be familiar to all of you, not that view. This is the Selwyn Waikirikiri. It literally splits us in half as a valley. So we're a glacial valley. We farm the headwaters. There are a couple of properties above us, but we are basically the convergence of the true Selwyn. Just behind us in this picture is where the north branch of the Selwyn runs in out of 30 Mile Wash. So I often feel we get a little bit forgotten about in the Selwyn discussion because we are right at the top of the river and the area, but we do have quite a big part to play. That's a bit of a family mission there. We're sort of working through that at the moment. We've got a succession which is constant in farming. You're always working out succession. If you get it sorted for your generation, you're constantly working on the next one. I think for most family multi-generational farms, I think you're working on at least 3 generations, probably with an eye to the 4th. So we tend to think in quite long time frames, and that doesn't mean we're going to be here for 100 years, but that's certainly our intention. The station was an early run, picked up. My family's been here since 1973. So my grandfather basically bought it for my father and uncle. Dad took the High Peak block when they split in the late 80s, and Colin, my uncle, was next door at Port Hill, which is just slightly up the valley. It's important, that point, because I farm with my brother and sister and our families. My wife and I run the farming. My brother Simon runs the tourism. My sister Amelia runs a beekeeping business with Tom. So we couldn't split the farm again. We sort of, on a stock unit basis, on the land area basis, we had a big block, but we were limited in our options going forward. So we had to think about the problem differently. How do we generate that income off the property and keep that asset in the family? 73 is an important year for this. We talked about some adversity and some of the things, challenges we've had to face, and I'll come back to that at the end. 3 months after Dad took over High Peak in 1973, some of you will remember we had 1973 snow. I've seen the photos, so as much as Dad liked to add GST to his stories as he got older, it was a genuine 5-foot snow, and it's quite phenomenal photos. The army came up to help us. This was admittedly a couple of weeks later. They'd only just taken over the farm. They didn't know where the boundaries were. The farm had been overstocked for sale. Something that's highly illegal now, but also probably monitored a bit more. The net fallout from that was we lost, I think it was 48% of the sheep and 36% of the cattle. So that's only 3 months into Dad's journey. I wasn't even born. I don't think I was even thought about at this point. But it's had a bigger effect on my farming life than any other event. So I went through the 92 snow. I've been through other environmental events. It'll happen again. But it's quite an interesting one that probably the thing that dictates my farming more than anything else was an event I wasn't even around for. So as a business, we are farming, tourism, agorism, and we're looking to directly export and also add value to our products on farm and domestic markets. So it's really important. I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. I'll get a lot out of today. The farming I'll move to in a minute. Sheep, beef and deer, basically. So, and we're quite a cold valley. We're 400 metres more or less, 450 at the houses, up to nearly 1,000 metres, and it acts probably a bit more like an Otago Valley in many ways than the Canterbury Valley. We don't get the wind that comes down the Rakaia and the Waimarie. So that's the family. Our team is a lot bigger than that. We use a lot of contractors. I have 3 full-time staff that work for me, and it's really interesting putting the lens of the technology over it, especially with what Jolyn just talked about. Yeah, I still farm with dogs. It seems like the high country is the last place to get the technology. We've got amazing things like halter. We just got priced out for halter recently. I think we were going to have 18 towels in our place, whereas most farms would have 2. So I understand there's big changes afoot with halter, but yeah, we'll adopt the technology when it gets to us. It's just it takes a wee while to come up the river, basically. The tourism business is getting bigger all the time. That started with something based around trophy hunting that Dad did many years ago, and is now over 50%, generally most years over 50% of the gross revenue of the business. And I'll talk about the years COVID, because it's largely based on international travellers. I'll talk about that soon, the effect that had on this as well. So basically my wheelhouse, I do the pastoral farming. These are our stock numbers. And already you'll get a picture that aside from the income streams we've talked about, even within farming, we're very diversified. Sheep is both lamb and wool. Wool hasn't been a big part of our calculations up until hopefully more recently it's coming back up. We're a strong wool, so we are looking to export a product directly offshore, which I'll come to. The cattle, a lot more simple beef production. The deer we split between venison and velvet. And because of our climatic limitations, our long winter, our early frosts, our deep snows, our stock policy hasn't changed, even though we really haven't seen big snows like we used to. Our stock policy hasn't changed, where we destock for the winter. We get everything off farm by probably, we're looking at it now, early April. We're trying to get rid of our last lambs, calves, and weaner deer. And that's driven by just that grass growth curve. There is an ability to finish some stock. The reality is within this catchment and wider Canterbury, if you play a specialist role, there are far better finishing properties closer to the ocean down here where the climate's a bit more forgiving. And we are best as a breeding unit. It's what suits the land. I won't venture too far into pine trees, but we have a lot of forestry as neighbours. Ironically, it's at the back of this photo. It's an income diversification as well, and obviously a greenhouse gas offset. But we do have some neighbours that are more or less planting pine trees, whole farm conversions. I won't wade too deeply into that, but I don't think that's our future in this province. Maybe right tree, right place, if we can really zero in what that means. Tourism, mainly guided hunting. We've had a hosted skiing business in the past. We'll be looking to do more events on farm, corporate events, product launches. We've built an office which has a boardroom upstairs, people staying on farm. Horse trekking's the latest one. We're constantly coming up with ideas, stress testing them, throwing them out, rehashing them. It seems to be an ongoing process, but it's quite a fun one to engage in. Aphorism, that's the most recent addition to the farm, and it's probably a really interesting one too, in the sense that most of what Tom and Amelia do is exported directly offshore, and so it's really chasing that value. We can't extract the value that we can offshore that we can in New Zealand, and it is absolutely about trust. It's absolutely about building a story. And as most farmers, we tend to hide behind the farm gate. We don't want to be a face to that story. It's becoming more and more apparent to me and critical that we actually have to put our faces out there. We can sell a nice view, but people want to know who is producing the product and get a personal touch to it. So that probably brings us on to the next big challenge for us, which is we'll put export up there, but it's basically about adding value to our product. So we've got a number of we've got 3 different red meat proteins. We've got honey, wool, we've got a tourism product. Focus for the physical products off the farm was basically wool and tea, because they don't expire as quickly. You're on clock once you've with red meat, particularly chilled, and there's pressures that come with that and forcing a sale. Whereas if you've got a shelf-stable product, you can sit on that for quite a long time and you're not forced into a soft selling decision. So Tom's got 2 main export markets for the honey: the Middle East, the more stable part of the Middle East currently, and Japan. They're really premium markets and they don't require huge volume, so it's a great suit for us. We are about 450 hives. We don't want to go and take on the big honey producers out there. We want to sell a story and be a boutique producer and sell honey that is more like a wine, that it's actually got a story behind it and a taste to it. It's not a mass-produced honey. Red meat, really close to my heart. We'd love to do a lot more in that space, but it's a complicated industry, as you'd all appreciate. Wool, we're a carpet wool, and I don't like the term personally, but we are a strong micron wool out of a Perindale, so we're a flooring type wool, which almost seems to devalue the product, but it's a fantastic product. At the moment, we are getting our wool scoured at Timaru, shipped out to India and handmade into carpets that we're selling into with a collaboration, a branding and design partner in the US, and also the hand weavers in India, and we're selling those in the upper east coast of the US. Very small project, very slow to get going, but the value's always been there, and I guess that's what we'll always put value before volume. We aim to scale up, but I'm too impatient to wait for the wool industry to come right as a strong wool grower, basically. I'm very jealous of what Simon does with the hunting. He's a price setter, I'm a price taker, and Tom has moved his way into being a price setter as well. So that's something we'd love to do. I was fortunate to go to South America recently and very much got a first-hand impression that if we rely on commodities, we'll get eaten up. They're just so big and so much cheaper labour and so much more efficient because of scale that we really have to, in my mind, my personal opinion, brand and add value that way. So Simon gets to set the price for his hunts each season. If the market isn't elastic enough, he just doesn't sell the hunts, and so he can move his price up and down depending on where the demand is. I literally, for most of my farming career, have just been offered a price and I have to accept that price. It's not something I'm comfortable with. It's the system currently, but we shouldn't got to move out of that. I'm not sure I'm going for time. Someone. Oh, how long? Sorry? 5? Perfect. So that probably links us back into our environmental story, and it really does have to be about a story. We finally, after many years of being pushed into it, put ourselves in the Balanced Farm Environment Awards, and it was a really good process for the farm. So interestingly, with the storytelling, it wasn't us at our best. We'd always been asked to go in. Dad had a very big role in the sustainability space, or the environmental space with farming. He was chair of the QE2 National Trust for nine years. So he had quite a lot of pressure on him to join. And we'd always resisted because the project's never finished. You're always waiting to get that last piece in the puzzle. I'm old enough now to know that you never get the last piece in the puzzle, but the puzzle just evolves and it moves, and you put different pieces in different places. So in 2021, we had a big flood at the top of the river, and apparently that was a 1 in 200 year event. I suspect I'll see another one or something very similar in my lifetime. It had a really big effect on our business. COVID had just come in, so the tourism had just managed to grow some 50% of the business. We lost that within a matter of days when they shut the borders. Big effect on farming and our sales. We've managed to get our lamb sale through, but we hadn't sold weaned deer or cattle. So the net result was, in that year, 2020, we were, I think, 70-something% down, 73% down on gross income. Problem was, it was in March, and the way our cash flow works, all our outcomes are in the first half of the financial year, July to January, basically, and our income comes in the second half. So we'd already spent the money that we didn't have, as my bank had constantly reminded us. So we were in a really tough position as a business. It took a couple of years to come up. On top of that, we had a 1 in 200 year flood event, which basically destroyed our infrastructure. So we didn't have the ability to buy our way out of that problem. And halfway through this, my wife Gemma thought it would be a great idea, because she got sick of hearing all this talk about the Balance Award. She entered us in the awards, and we thought, well, this is not a great time to view our business. However, I quite like the fact that it was a journey of us getting off our knees and having to rebuild. And I think, well, I assume it resonated with the judges, but it ties back into what we're talking about as a value-added branded proposition. We can't just put a pretty picture up and say, this is what we do. We have to give people a personal view into our systems. And that's quite terrifying sometimes, because from a farmer for the last 5 to 6 years, probably the last decade, I felt quite under siege about what I do as a business without, I don't think, people fully understanding it. So, or some people fully understanding it. And so that's our job, is to make sure people do understand that there is a big cost to sustainability, that we, to use the old cliche, we farm in the green when we're in the black, when we're making money. We have to continually be able to do that. Otherwise, we just can't afford to do some of these projects that we want on the farm. And there are headwinds. There are environmental headwinds. There are economic headwinds. We're going, probably not a huge impact on our business currently, but we're going through the fuel one at the moment. It's the realization that those are constants, but it's actually being able to tell consumers who are hopefully buying directly off us, actually being able to explain these stories and go, it's not always us at our best. We'll actually share the bad times with you as well. But if you identify with us, with our production systems, then hopefully, if you make an emotional connection to where your food fibre comes from, that you're hopefully willing to part what we think is correct value for our products. So I think that's probably enough for me. Thank you very much.
Introduce this next speaker. You've all been sitting down for well over an hour now, so would anybody like to stand up, stretch? We've got another half an hour, 50 minutes to go before we're going to go do something. Yeah, excellent. I know I'm having
Cool. Before we
Yes.
before we actually have a
All right, you don't take advantage.
something, right?
Boom.
Yeah. Ladies and gents, I would like to introduce the third speaker of this morning. And Philip, and the owner and of Melton Estate, and boutique winery, and restaurant, event space, and also a colleague. And because we are sitting together in an advisory group for the Selwyn District, where we actually try to give them feedback on their economic development plan. So please welcome Philip to the stage.
Thank you, Wim, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going from the world to a huge station to 12 acres now, so it's nice. But let's see what we can show you about it. If you read the news, wine's bad, wine's sad, not so cool. Sauvignon Blanc is down 7% and falling. And people saying how tough it is. And people say to me, oh, it must be hard in the wine industry. I'm going to change that view because I think it's not quite the industry I'm in. This is my only and last graph, but it shows how much Sauvignon Blanc's falling, how bad Pinot Noir and Chardonnay is. But what's growing is Merlot or Champagne, as you may know, and Sparkling Rosé. So there's some positives out there, particularly for the Selwyn District. We'll get to that. So what I'm going to go through in my presentation is 5 light bulb moments that have changed business. Talk about what a future farmer is now, and then explain perhaps what it all means for the business I'm actually in, and what is Selwyn's future. It's going to be a lot of pictures and a few stories, and we'll start with the first light bulb moment. Anyone been to Toast Martinborough or the Martinborough Wine and Food Festival? Well, I went 30 years ago when it was much, much smaller. And in those days, little wineries would have something. You would go around in a horse and cart or an old bus or something like that. It wasn't full of people drinking excessively or being boozy or anything like that. It was much more refined. But I went to a place called Atarangi. Does anyone have an Atarangi Pinot Noir? One of my favourite wines. People say, where's the best Pinot from? I'd say Martinborough. It's fantastic. And that little occasion, I went to this winery at this Toast Martinborough event. And Atarangi was this tiny little place. I think that little hut is still there. And at Toast Martinborough, you had to have, to be a winery involved, you had to have wine, obviously. You had to have music, and you had to have food. Atarangi, which is one of New Zealand's premier wine makers, particularly Pinot Noir, had a guy on a guitar and a caravan selling food. It wasn't anything fancy. But my light bulb moment was a place of 10, 15, 20 acres could actually grow a premium product. You could decide what you wanted to sell, who it was to be sold to, and maybe the price you could get for it, which is totally different to most other small farms, particularly here in Selwyn. And that really led me to think, rather than IT, could I make something of a small farm? Well, I couldn't straight away, but that's the idea. And hence we went about to build a vineyard. Back in those days, no one wore a vest. We just got on and used tools. That was fine. There's no forms. We got out, we do the work, and we prune in the cold and the rain. We look after the grapes in the middle of the frost. And here's the frost protection with using local water to protect the vines. I'm up all night, by the way. We grow grapes in a place where people said, you don't grow grapes in Selwyn. You've got to be in Blenheim. You've got to be in North Canterbury. Who said? We pick with students, we pick with friends and families, we have fun. And here is the classic dirty hand with the grapes photo, which you've got to do. We'll do all that. But if you're just growing grapes, trying to make wine, is there money in it these days? It's really hard work. You've got to add value. The second light bulb moment, it's called a pink Moscato. Has anyone had pink Moscato? Anyone been to the Yarra Valley? Fantastic. This is called a pink Moscato from a place called Innocent Bystander in Healdsville, the Yarra Valley. And I walked into this little place and there was a young lady there with a t-shirt on that said, I'm not here to sell you wine. Would you like to try a pink Moscato? I'd love to try a pink Moscato. It's free. Sounded interesting. And that set me on a journey to say, well, if they can grow pink Moscato, what can we do here in Selwyn? We made a wine called Summer Love. What a silly name. But you know, a lot of people don't like Riesling, but you call it Summer Love and people love it. I don't know why. That's marketing. Trademarked the word Summer Love. Have the domain summerlove.co.nz. And now it's grown and grown and grown. And last year we made 40,000 bottles and it goes all around the country. A silly thing called Summer Love, eh? And it's made from a grape that people don't even like. Riesling. People love growing Riesling. People talk about Riesling, but no one buys it. You should call it Summer Love, add a bit of Pinot to it, make it fizzy. People talk about it all day. In fact, they call me the Summer Love Man. Which is really weird. It's slightly complimentary at the same time. And now it's become a thing. Whoops. And shut thing. It's support. There we go. Thank you. Now it's become a thing. People talk about it. I went to the food show in the weekend. Talked about it. We had the Selwyn District Harvest Festival last weekend in Rolleston. People walk past and say, that's my favourite. That's all it is wine. If I go to an event and someone said, where do you work? Oh, well, I work at Melbourne State. I've had your wine. They remember it. If you've been to a corporate event and been given a glass of white wine, you don't know, oh, that's fine. They talk about this because of the name. But then we also had a light bulb moment from going to events and talk to people and asking about how they want to enjoy the product. So it's not just the product, it's how they enjoy it, how they take it to their party, how they take it to their celebration. We put wine in cans. Someone called it a tin the other day. We don't talk about wine in tins, we talk about wine in cans. It's much more professional. And people would say, oh, I'd never drink a wine out of a can. But somebody that's going to a party that wants to take 2 standard drinks and know they're going to have their 2 standard drinks loves that. If they're going on a boat or if they're going on a tramp, they can do that. It's giving people what they want at the time they want it. So thinking about not just your product, but the persona of the person that you're selling your product to is so important. We even put it in kegs. I know that sounds gross, okay? But think about a festival. When you are at the Food and Wine Festival, the biggest selling wine at that festival, again, a little wine from a place in 12 acres in Selwyn, the biggest selling wine, the only way to deliver volume is to have 3 keg stations going and you're pouring wine like that. How to do COVID well was my other light bulb moment. I thought, well, we're all going to be locked down. We're going to be at home. I'm going to be productive. But the one advantage I had is I had a keg of beer at the restaurant. I thought if I work hard all day, I'm allowed to have myself 2 beers and regrouped and decided, did I do a good job that day and be a good farmer? I replanted a third of the vineyard and decided to grow champagne, or method traditional, as we must say, since we're not in the Champagne region. We made a games lawn that people could have fun and experiences. In fact, it's a helipad as well. And a friend of mine works at the airport and said, I'm officially have a helipad at my place, which I thought was pretty cool. I don't have a helicopter. And I invested more and more into the Summer Love to make that something that was even better. What was my fifth light bulb moment? Well, I realized after doing all this stuff, we're not selling wine. We're not selling a restaurant. We're selling experiences. That's what people want to buy now. And I know we're talking a lot about production and agriculture, but at end results, we're selling good times. We're selling a way to people to thank others. We're selling a way for people to be taken away from their ordinary day, a way for people to celebrate good times. And we can do that in Selwyn. So you'll see a lot of our imagery isn't so much about wine. We don't have the dirty hands and grapes anymore. That's not cool. We have people enjoying celebrations. You know, in fact, the other day, we see people having even a wedding. We also hosted a memorial. It was a celebration of what they did, and wine was just part of it. And so you'll see these imageries appearing in all of our marketing now. But in fact, we've upped it again. We don't just sell lunch. We don't just sell wine. We sell a summer love picnic. We sell champagne breakfast. We sell a Petanque Pinot in platinum package. That was hard to say. That was the 4-piece marketing then rather than 4-piece. Yeah. And we sell food and wine tasting experience. This is what people want to buy now. This is what people want to give. We're still selling a product made in Selwyn. We're still selling agri-tourism, but we're packaging it up in a way that people love and want to buy and want to give. And to do that, a day for a winery owner, let's say a future farmer, we're using those sorts of terms, there's a whole lot of other things rather than drive the tractor. I love driving the tractor, but you've got to do other stuff for that to work. Obviously, we're in sales, we're helping people with their experiences, buying things they want to buy for themselves and give. There's a big tech stack, which you might find unusual, but you've got to live and breathe your life in the CRM. We've changed to a Shopify website, which is integrated to things like Zapier, so you can pump those names back to your customer database. Google Business Profile is so important to know where you live so people can find you. I don't think my SEO is working too good at the moment, so I've got my nephew on that. Google reviews come in, and I'm using Claude at the moment to write packages and get work done quicker. So whilst I'm a farmer, we're also there to make sure we get it out the door. I'm on logistics. I'm sending wine oddly to Woolworths in Auckland, who then send most of it back to Woolworths in Rolleston. But that's the logistic problem, but I do that. It grates me. I'm in production, obviously. I'm ordering my bottles from China. My caps come from Portugal. The bottles are coming, the cartons are coming locally. All of these things need to turn up on a certain day so that we can go into production. Obviously, accounts. I wrote HR, then I said, oh, we don't use HR because they have people and culture. I must get that right. We're obviously investing in our partners in government. Maybe learning new things is last on the list, but because there's so much to do. Constantly questioning as a small business owner where to use your time the best. And you think you get that right. So our place in Selwyn is about not just being a farmer, not just growing wine. Am I in the wine business? Yes. Am I in the hospitality business with a restaurant, a conference venue? Yes. But actually in the end, we're selling an agri-tourism experience. and an agritourism product that goes around the country. And that's what I think the future of Selwyn is thinking not just what we grow, but who our customers and where it's going to go. So I put up a picture of broccoli. I'll get to that. But what's Selwyn's future? Do we wait? We talked about in the past, there's this lovely big group of Christchurch people who are all going to come out to our farms and buy stuff. I don't think we can wait for that anymore. We've talked about that for a long time. Do we take it to the world? Yes, the last speaker's doing that, and we've all got to do that. But how do we make it a Selwyn experience? Well, people want to buy this wine with their broccoli. They don't want to come to a winery necessarily. You know, we've got people asking me, where do I buy it in Waimarie? Where do I buy it in Wellington? Well, unfortunately, or rightly or wrong, we need distribution partners. Yes, the supermarkets take most of the margin. Yes, they dictate the terms. But we need them to spread the word for us. We've got to get it out there. We can't hand sell all of it ourselves. And so getting out there with the Selwyn experience is growing here, but helping to take it out with other partners to get there. Finally, when I look at a post like this, transformative agribusiness, it's not just the production, but we've got to transform how we sell it as well. So we're getting it out there and showing people we can sell it to the world. Thank you very much.
Philip, thank you very much. Can you stay up here? Hamish, Jolan, and Mike, am I allowed to invite you guys up? Q&A time. Well, you have seen the three gents already talking. You haven't seen Micah. Micah is one of the researchers that is actually preparing the report that will be downloadable in a couple of weeks' time from the Selwyn District Council website. Open the floor for questions.
Just I'd be keen to differentiate between the customer and consumer, and you all talked about trust, and I totally agree, but is there a point where the consumer has such an emotional connection that they just expect you to do the farm insurance planning and all the food security and compliance, and versus the customer, it's a demand from the customer, let's say the wholesaler, but for the likes of Summer Long, Philip, do you think that the consumer that buys Summer Long, they just expect you to do all that stuff?
Yeah, they do. I would say we're lucky with wine because we've got the sustainable wine growing program, which guides us in everything we do. And I would say it actually saves money. It gives you so much focus to produce a quality product. That only gets the product to the tank in many ways, though. So the effort is in understanding the buyer types, the people that are your end customer, how they want to be, how they want to consume your product. You know, I would say that for my product is many people are trading up from a $15 par road. You know, that's sort of the baseline. We go across to New World, it's $15 par road. We're asking them to pay $25. So they're going to do it for a treat for themselves or a treat for their friends. So everything we've got to do is about uplifting it to being that it is for their celebration. Now, we're only just part of the celebration, but maybe it makes the occasion.
Anybody else that likes to react to the question?
The only thing I'd add to that was I think, yeah, there's definitely an expectation, but I think we still have to prove it.
Yeah.
If I went to possibly a whole lot of our customers or consumers and explain to me what NZFAB plus means, I don't think they'd have a clue.
Absolutely.
But it's on me. I have to comply.
A question in the back there.
Mine is not it's not a question, it's just a note of appreciation because I've had an opportunity, a rare opportunity of working with you, at the Melton estate. As an international student, I gained a lot of experience as well as exposure on how to do day-to-day activities. It's a mind-blowing experience that I've shared with my people home. I managed to get a couple of his wives. They taste really nice. It's the people and culture aspect that he highlights is very important, and I like the way he does it.
Thank you so much for your compliment.
Yeah, so we've got a real challenge because the early slides showed that 84% of what came out of Selwyn was commodities, basically, or greater. And yeah, to get the value, we've got to get some value associated with it. So how do you think we're going to transition that 84% to capture more value?
Let's take that question on.
I think what the presentation showed is that we have more than 80% dairy products exported. I know that there are some businesses that are not only selling skim milk powder, but definitely high value products like infant nutrition. And so I think it is wrong to look at dairy industry as only looking at commodities. I realize that a large part will be commodities. How do we add value? Well, probably by actually making sure that we don't break the trust that we have, or building a stronger trust. But perhaps Jolan?
Yeah, it's a real challenge across New Zealand to that drive from commodities to a value add. I completely concur with the comments of, by the way, about dairy. I think there's a whole lot of different ways that value is added to dairy. I think it's also around partnerships and networks globally. So sometimes we might be, for example, creating ingredients here in New Zealand that are going into a product that's made in market, say in China or in Japan, but we're still part of the overall value creation and the final product. We get the right partnerships and networks. But I think it is an ongoing challenge, not uncommon for new innovations and startups here to then be bought by overseas companies, and sometimes we lose that value. So I acknowledge the challenge. It's something we need to keep looking at.
Moving to that side of the room, Rachel.
I'll just get you to introduce yourself and where you're from when you ask your question. That's okay.
Rachel Bryant, Lincoln University. I was interested in the concept of digital twinning and wondered whether or not that would be something that for these growers in the state and High Peak Station, whether is that something you could see as would add value to your business?
At this stage, the digital twin technology in terms of on-farm application is still in its infancy. So we've got prototypes going for egg production, also applying it for things like cherry production, etc. So if I was to share that this kind of technology is on its way, I think it needs to be proven by a research, science, technology kind of innovation at this stage. And then, but also need to really interact with real food producers so that when it is applied more broadly across the country, it's got good usability. There's not kind of barriers to using it in terms of price areas, that kind of thing. So I think in some areas the digital twins is currently really being used around the world, but from a food production point of view, I think we're still finding a way to develop it.
I have a question on that side of the room. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Gail Suter-Brown, Lavender Farmer, Greenstone Design, environmental steward, amongst other things. Wondering about probably a question for you, Joel. How does a food producer access the science, the scientists to test a product into the food chain? So we've got ingredients. Science says, yeah, okay, we've got some evidence that it would be useful in this sort of end product, end use. What sort of partnerships are available here? We've got the two universities. Who are the connection points? Where do we reach out to with a bright idea to test those ideas out, to actually put it in the lab?
Very good question. So first of all, just to come back around kind of research and science that's existing in New Zealand, it's right from kind of longer term loose science type research, looking well out into the future, for example, some of the digital type development. right through to very near to market type work, working directly with companies. So I think basically the next point is you can get to any of us, we can direct you through to the right person, scientist or technologist. I mentioned earlier that with the very new bioeconomy science institute, we are hopefully from July bringing the New Zealand Food Innovation Network on board as well. So that is an organisation that works really close to market, helping with pilot scale of new ingredient to beverage innovation. They have a food science facility here located at the University, also food bowl in Auckland, for example, and food and Tiger as well down at Tiger University. So
follow-on question into medical research. Have we got links from food production through into medical research?
Yes. So it's driven by collaboration. So, for example, in the clinical trial area, looking at functional food ingredients, sport performance ingredients, often with the University of Auckland or the University of Otago, or wider through Singapore as well.
Who in Singapore? Is that in US?
Based,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So that kind of depends exactly what the functional performance or health actually you're wanting to show. Clinical trials can be very expensive, but there's also digital tools that can sometimes be used to show proof of concept at early stages as well without going to the clinical trial.
Thank you so much. We have a question from that side of the room.
Heather from Lonsdale Sheepberry. Just around the provenance story, starting out as a small producer and trying to cut your teeth on the domestic market before you go to export and trying to get that provenance story. But then you go to the supermarket and it seems like more and more of it is home brand or PAMs, and you pick it up and it says from imported and manufactured from imported and local ingredients. As a small producer starting out, how do you compete against that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's probably where I came back to that. We have to, if we can, educate the consumer to what they're actually getting. And I'll be the first one, as frequently as I go to the supermarket, to sometimes buy on price or just pick up something, and then I get it home, particularly probably in the case of sport, and realise this was never out on the chain. I get it from producers in New Zealand. So it's a really tough question how to start. For a start, I think that if we can get these clients to the supermarket, because I think their model probably promotes that, there are options, I think more options in the future with ways of not cutting out a supermarket completely, but going around it, circumventing slightly. And I think conscious consumers are willing to pay and seek it out. They will look at it. If there's well at both ends, we'll find a way to connect.
John Sunkel, farmer in the district. I'll challenge you back on the embarrassment of buying the pork that's come in when we've just said 80% of our product gets exported to a market. So we need someone on the other side of the equation to purchase our product. So how do we correlate or balance the need for the niche or the new or the whatever with the requirement to have an export market and a consumer somewhere else purchasing a product? And how do we, where does that balance sit? I understand what you're saying, but as a dairy farmer, you're not going to drink all my milk.
Yeah, totally agree. Might have to clarify the question slightly. The first thing to say on that is probably some perspective that some of the regulations that our milk industry is under. I don't think the import products is the same regulation. I've always found that gross down there, basically. Could I just sort of narrow down the question slightly?
Well, I guess it's just, yes, how does a small startup get into the local market when they're competing against an imported product in a sense, or a generic import, and go, how do we stop this? So my question is, do we want to stop that because we export 80% of our product and rely on a consumer somewhere else to buy an import into their market?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And not like the dairy farm, but certainly the majority of our products, lamb, beef, that we produce. So if we had a proliferation of 10,000 farms selling bread in New Zealand, we'd be after as well. So I think the market regulates itself, or finds its own equilibrium. Some brands, some farmers will find a way of doing that. You have to have, we talk about land resources in place that might be such as time, capital time. We can name a long list of other ones. Funnily enough, our funding family structure has actually allowed us to have a bit more time. We sort of bounce ideas off each other, and we have different people pushing different projects at different times. But I can certainly understand a lot of people physically can't do it, and to your point, so we're good at exporting. And it's probably in the sense, if I use an example for beef, getting up from South America, there's a commodity beef and there's a premium beef. And I think sometimes, and probably rightly so, we try to get a sale, we'll put it in a commodity area, whereas most of the beef I saw in Argentina was sold to into a feedlot. And I don't think New Zealand would define that as grass fed because we are all through the pasture. So it's probably that differentiating what is the true commodity and where, there's a great system, you're not commodity value added, there's going to be some grade in play. How to start, I don't know, because having done fully, we went straight to export, we didn't do local movement.
Nicole, student at Massey, as well as working at Waimarie District Council. And I'm just curious about whether or not any of the research that you've done within Selwyn has looked at the need to increase our local domestic production capacity and how that would contribute to our economy. Because as we're seeing, with McCain's and Wattie's shutting down, fuel crisis, reliance on imports, that our domestic, 80% of our food is leaving, and we produce more than enough to feed New Zealanders. And so, just say, what's the view of and the possibility of creating a domestic level distribution and market that can contribute rather than solely focusing on export?
Yeah. So this is a great thanks. These are all really great aspects. They came through all the interviews that we held with different stakeholders in the region. We haven't done it through the model just yet, but this is definitely something that we will look into because that will add as well to the story. So sorry, I don't have any right answer for that now, but it's definitely has been mentioned in the report and will be something as future recommendations.
For the other three, do you see value in creating more localized markets, and would you be interested in, is that a value chain that you think you can sell into rather than focusing on export?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely.
Any more questions? Oh, we have two more questions. We'll do two more questions. And we go to
Michael Edmonds, Biomolecular Interaction Centre, and also New Zealand Product Accelerator. I'm just picking up on Gail's question. As the New Zealand Product Accelerator can connect businesses with a network of scientists and researchers across New Zealand. So there's a really good opportunity there. And just thank you for some great talks. The value add and the changes in marketing was really interesting perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
There on the University of Canterbury, the niche producers are able to add value on. As a rough stab in the dark, what size would you get to that when you're no longer a niche producer and when you lose that value-added component? If you doubled your, or went an order of magnitude bigger in either of your productions, would you suddenly lose that ability to be able to dictate prices the way you are? You're pushing into different markets.
I'd always try to sell margin. That's I think because you know production costs. So the margin is what you're looking for all the time. coming back to perhaps emerging suppliers trying to market and answer your question, you really need a multi-channel approach. Like or not, we need markets to give us distribution. Not everybody needs to come to Waimarie, they want to buy with their property, hence my slide. People may in this fuel crisis want to sit at home and buy and things can be for free. Someone can pay for it. But at the same time, this ability to learn from customers, you need to take them. We need to go to markets, we need to go to the food show, harvest festival, the A&B shows to learn about what people are wanting. I think that gives you such a great exposure at once. So to be connected to customers is so key, no matter how big you are, and to learn from them, touch them, how they want to consume, get, enjoy, are all things you've got to keep learning from every day. So it doesn't change.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking all our speakers.
It's not similar, we're sorry. So that is the end of our first session this morning. We'll now move into the foyer for morning tea. And when we come back here after morning tea, we hand over the microphone and the work and the pens to all the tables in the room. And that will carry us through until our next session at lunch. Now, we flagged already several times this morning that you've indicated that networking is a thing that you feel is lacking in your world and your sector. So please do take this opportunity to meet somebody you've never met before. My show of hands game, who knows every single person in this room? So there has to be somebody to meet who you haven't met before. If you do find somebody you want to continue a conversation with afterwards, this is where you can write that. And we will send you this as a reminder in 2 weeks when you get back to your office and are stuck into your work again. So have a think about other opportunities that you might like for networking. You can add these here too. All of this will get taken into account. And you can have these until the end of the day. When you leave at the end of the day, we'll have a letterbox for you to post them in at the end. All right, so any questions, do come see any of us at the break. We're going to be back here on the tables ready to go at 11:05. Just a reminder that there's no food or drink in this room, so you can have that.
These are the ones that save us a lot of starting costs.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back. It means we're doing something right. When I started this morning talking to the research that the ARU team did, we mentioned something about technology. We also mentioned something about net zero and holding us to the climate, to the Paris. For the people that have no idea what was just happening, Katie is producing the event, and she organized everything. So just a hand over, Katie. Thank you so much. So she's also keeping me in check, so I was outside the view of the camera, so that's why I had to hop this side. So during the introduction, we basically concluded that technology will be really important for the future of food and fibre here in the Selwyn District. One of the things that we saw as well is that our drive to net zero becomes really important as well. Well, the cool thing is those two can't be independent of each other. So they actually drive to zero emissions will be aided by technology. And I'm really proud to introduce Ruth. I had the pleasure of already talking and meeting multiple times to be our next speaker. So she will talk what agri-zero is doing in this field. Thank you so much, Ruth. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Can you guys all hear me okay? Am I standing in the right spot? Okay. Thanks for having me, everybody. So who has heard of agri-zero before? I'm a bit nervous about boring people who've heard me speak before. Like I've seen some people in the room that have heard me say this before, but what I'm going to do is, I guess, introduce for you, particularly those of you who don't know who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the progress we've made since we were established just over 3 years ago now. So 1st of February 2023 was day one of agri-zero. I started that day as a seconded employee initially on a part-time basis, with about 4 others. And now we're a small team still, but we do have 16 people really focused on trying to make progress to grow the competitive advantage of our agricultural exports. So I think quite relevant actually for the topics for today. So my role at agri-zero is heading the strategy and engagement function, which now includes things like adoption, regulatory strategy, monetising reduction. So if anybody has any thoughts about any of that at the end of this short talk, my email address will be up on the last page, so please do make contact. I need all the ideas I can get. So who are agri-zero? We are actually a joint venture set up these days as a limited partnership between the private sector, 10 different agribusinesses and banks. You can see who they are on the slide, who have put money into agri-zero. We are an investment fund. The New Zealand government has matched that funding from the private sector dollar for dollar. Okay, so we are not a government entity. We have a separate board, separate governance and decision making, but we are set up to act on their behalf, to invest, to try and help Kiwi farmers stay competitive and at the top of the leaderboard globally by reducing our emissions and keeping our pasture-based farming system that we do have today. We also work really closely with the Ag Emissions Centre. So this is a research organisation who've been thinking long and hard about things like reducing methane from ruminants for a good 2 decades. agri-zero is focused on the commercialisation, so trying to accelerate, particularly companies who are developing innovations that can help reduce methane and nitrous oxide specifically. So we're really focused on those livestock emissions. Ag Emissions Centre really on the research, foundational research side. We're commercial accelerator trying to get things into the market faster. So our purpose is to undertake targeted investments and actions to try and accelerate the speed of these tools getting to market. Like I mentioned, there has been research going on in New Zealand for quite some time, but it is a hard thing to do, to find granted we have already pretty optimised pastoral farming system in New Zealand, relatively, compared to our overseas peers. So trying to find technology that fits into our current farming system and can reduce emissions further is what we're tasked with. So since we've been set up, by the way, we've had $191 million of funding has come into the fund for the first 4 years. Probably in about a month's time, we'll announce our next 3 years of funding with really good commitment again from the public and private sector, who remain focused on, I guess, the realisation that to maintain that value of our exports, we want to be able to meet the needs of global customers and trading partners who still care about sustainability, believe it or not. If you listen to Trump too much, you might think otherwise, but actually that's not the case. And certainly even in the US, we see really strong demand for New Zealand low emissions product. So, as an export reliant nation, it's pretty important. We're exporting nearly everything, the majority of what we make on our dairy farms here in Selwyn overseas. And those customers do have choices of who they buy from. I'm saying customer, not consumer. So when I say customer, I mean somebody like a buyer in the procurement team at Nestle, for example, or Danone, or Whole Foods, or Costco's, or if it's red meat, it could be Sainsbury's, Tesco's, and so on. So, our farmers really are the backbone of the economy. We saw some numbers this morning, really significant in this economy here in Selwyn as well. And we want to make sure we keep it that way and double down on that competitive advantage we have. New Zealand is often talked about as being a leader in sustainability and really, really emissions efficient. We know that our competitors now will show you numbers that they're actually ahead of us now, or nearly ahead of us, or 3 or 4 of them will definitely show figures that show they're beating. We might dispute that. In New Zealand, we love a good competition, though. We want to stay at the top of the pack. So meeting the challenge, essentially we're here to give choice to farmers. We're investing in a whole portfolio of tools. We're not trying to pick one winner. We know that farmers all have different ideas of what's going to suit them on their farm. We know that some of these are early stage technologies and they're not all going to make it to market. Some will fail before they get there. Hopefully there's some good learnings along the way if that's the case. But we know that we want to have at least 2, 3, 4 things that reach the market and are really successful and effective to use on Kiwi farms. And so that's what our partnership has been set up to deliver. So I just want to talk a little bit briefly about the progress we've made. Might be hard to read those numbers, but they are available. We release a quarterly public scorecard because we're quite conscious that we've received government investment that's through the New Zealand government and specifically the Ministry of Primary Industries, who we work with most closely. But also, if you're a dairy farmer, you might also be getting fertiliser from Ravensdown. You might also be banking with one of the banks who's a member of AgriZero as well. You might be supplying Selwyn and Fonterra, who are also an investor in AgriZero. We want to be quite transparent about what money we've got and what we've spent it on. And so when we spend money, what we're actually doing is taking an equity stake in a startup company. And we're trying to take a reasonably significant stake so we can negotiate, and as terms of our investment, we negotiate a side letter agreement. That means that company is required to commercialise in New Zealand. Because even though our agricultural economy is really important to us, we don't have that many animals here. So if you're trying to commercialise something in cattle, you'd probably go to Brazil with 300 head of cattle, or you might go into another dairy sector where there's far more animals that you can address. So what we're trying to do is position New Zealand strategically as the place to come first, and we're requiring that with our investment. So all the companies you can see listed in that green box. I do have a slightly better slide with some logos in a minute I'll talk through. We do require that they come to New Zealand to commercialise, but we do enable that too. And I think that's the strength of the partnership we have with players like Synlay, who I can see some of my old colleagues in the room, and Fonterra. We can enable these startup companies to start to facilitate offtake agreement discussions already and have that access through to farmers. Also, the regulator and the policymaker, who is the New Zealand government, and through MPI, we often have really good collaborative discussions and workshops with our startup venture companies and the regulator together, so they can actually understand what we have to do here to get these things tested and approved in our conditions. Because I believe it or not, but New Zealand has some of the most rigorous regulatory standards for our food safety and supply chain, as we need to, because we export nearly everything and we rely on that food being safe and assured, again, as we heard this morning. So we can't be bringing something into New Zealand, a new technology that's going to have any negative impact on the food supply chain or exports either. So it's really important that they go through what's required to prove out that tech. So far, the numbers on the screen, we've met over 270 companies now, specifically in the methane and nitrous oxide space to abate, who are working on technologies to reduce or abate these methane and nitrous oxide emissions. So that sounds maybe like a lot of companies. We actually, as an investment fund, we're really focused, and that actually is a privilege, because if you think of sustainability, there's many things we can go into. If you think of agriculture more broadly, there's many areas of investment. We're really focused on the methane and the nitrous oxide, and that's for good reason. Methane is nearly 40% of New Zealand's total gross emissions is from enteric methane. So that's a significant opportunity. I'm going to use that word. It's a significant opportunity for us to address those, particularly if we can drive value and make those emissions reduction really worth something for farmers to diversify their income as well. So 270 companies. We've now invested in 12. We just announced one last week. It'll probably be on the next slide. Ruminate. Nearly every company in our portfolio has a bio or a rumen in the name. It just seems to be a thing in this world. Yeah, I'll talk through them on the next slide. And so far, we've committed nearly $80 million of our funding What we do is we're trying to go into these companies at a relatively early stage so we can be quite strategic and help shape their direction. We'll often take a board seat on these companies as well, so we get a bit of oversight on what they're doing, make sure they remember New Zealand and keep the focus. So we might go in at seed stage or Series A stage with a ticket size of $500,000 to maybe $10 million, but we reserve a good chunk of cash for follow-on. So when that company needs more capital to push further through the pipeline to commercialisation, we have sufficient funding to make sure they can get there, and specifically that they can get there in New Zealand, do the trials they need to do for it. So yeah, 12 ventures investments we're up to now. We've also got some catalytic capital, or catalyst investment as well. And with that, you know, we've done things like invest in a processing trial, actually with Fonterra, processing a methane inhibitor and seeing if that had any impact on milk. That's been published now last year. We've also invested in proving out adding, you know, things into dairy cow feed and how that is for farmers and experience and any learnings we can get. So basically it's more system-wide unlocking. That's the catalyst investment. If it's a ventures investment, it's an equity into a company. That's how we normally do it. There's still about 39 companies on our radar. There might be one or two in this room actually who are in development. Maybe they're a little early stage to consider equity investment. Maybe they are focused on other markets and we're trying to convince them that New Zealand's a place to be as well. So like I said, we are scanning around the world. We don't just invest in New Zealand companies, but we only invest in companies if they've got a solution that could work for a good portion of our livestock here in New Zealand in a pasture-based, predominantly pasture-based system. So we've kind of split it up on the screen. It was chunked at the time a little bit proportional to the quantum of investment made, but that is a dynamic chart. But what it does represent is the types of tools that have been developed and are available, and we've categorized it really and put the logos of the companies. So if you look at inhibitor, these are things that effectively are classed that way because they inhibit methane production in the rumen. There's methanogens in the rumen that are making the methane. We're trying to basically pivot them from being so active and actually trying to drive more production, because methane, when it gets burped out, is essentially lost energy, and there is potential opportunity to divert that energy into more meat or more milk. So that's the sort of underpinning theory behind a lot of the technology in this space, hopefully driving efficiency. On the inhibitor side, Agteria Biotech is the top one. They did a really successful lactating dairy trial in New Zealand last year with their product, Swedish startup, going through the regulatory process now in the EU as well as New Zealand, so quite lengthy, and it needs to be, but that's where they're at, looking really promising. Ruminant Biotech, this is actually a New Zealand startup, and they are operating in a space of, if you've heard of Asparagopsis seaweed, this is a natural seaweed that grows that has been shown to be highly effective at inhibiting methane production. But, you know, to scale enough seaweed cost effectively, consistently, in a stable way is quite challenging and very hard to do economically. But actually Ruminant Biotech are using that active ingredient, and they've stabilised that in a slow release bolus, a controlled release bolus. So bolusing is something that farmers are doing with their animals, not every single farmer, but many do, treating things, you know, supplementing animals or treating things like facial eczema. So their bolus lasts for 150 days and reduces methane around 70% during that time. They're going to plan on rolling out later this year, all pending a registration decision through MPI. So they're expecting that sort of around August, give or take. This is a process, they have to go through the process, so we can never be sure until it's done. But they'll start in beef cattle, and then they plan to extend that registration out to replacement heifers, which will be helpful for your dairying footprint, and then also into lactating animals too. But they have to prove the tech out in each livestock class as they go. Agri-tech products, it's a UK-based company that we've worked with, who have a daffodil-based compound actually. The daffodils grow quite well in rolling sheep country, and there's a co-product that's used to treat Alzheimer's, and hemanthamine from the daffodils is actually really effective at reducing methane as well. So that would be a feed supplement project, but they're very early stage. Ruminate, the next one, that was who we announced last week. Actually, this is an Australian-based company who are looking at about 4 different delivery mechanisms for their methane inhibitor. So water delivery, pellets, different capsules, and they've got a really good team behind them too, and really focused on trying to support a solution for methane. And then we do have a joint program with Zoetis. So there's been a long-running program with Zoetis, or a big animal health company, looking for a small molecule inhibitor that is safe for food, that can be deployed through lots of different feed systems, and some really promising candidates too. On the vaccine side, so that's the sort of the green bit, quite a significant investment across 2 companies there. Lucidome Bio is a New Zealand company that have made great progress and actually have been the pioneering effort to try and develop a methane vaccine. We also have Archaea Bio. They're planning 2 animal trials for the regulator this year in New Zealand. They're at proof of concept. They've shown you can inject an animal and you can reduce methane with the vaccine. So quite a different consideration. This is not a vaccine for disease. In fact, when you're vaccinating the animal with these products, you're not actually exposing the animal to anything that it hasn't been exposed to before. So yeah, it's a really interesting concept, but is showing great promise at the moment. On the pasture side, if you're looking at a pasture-based farming system, pasture is probably the best way to get something out to your herd or your flock that could help, drive production but reduce emissions at the same time. There's lots of solutions in this space, and lots of diverse pastures and plantains, something people have looked at, for example. There's also a lot of GM technology in this space too that we're keeping an eye on. The regulation here in New Zealand does not allow the use of that yet. Biolumica, a New Zealand US company, who are actually using natural UV light. And they're using specific recipes of UV light, so different wavelengths, and they're using that on ryegrass seeds for us to generate a specific expression of the gene. So naturally using UV light to create more lipids in the ryegrass. And what that does is, if you get the lipids to a sweet spot, which they are sort of at that point, they've proven they can do that now and get a sustained sustained reaction and increased lipids that then passes down to daughter seeds. What that does is drive productivity per hectare, but also reduces methane up to about 12%. So that's another project. So it's a 20-minute treatment just before bagging the ryegrass seeds. So it's not constrained as much by breeding cycles as some other the traditional crop breeding techniques. On the probiotics side, we've got 3 companies all working in this space, and really they're using the principle that if you look at the rumen and you look at the microbiome, animals that are low methane emitters and highly efficient, so highly efficient at converting feed into milk or meat, have a uniqueness in their microbiome. And so it's trying to steer the rumen in the direction of the low emitters, basically, by using probiotics, and in some cases pre and probiotics together as well. And so they're developing feed additives and an oral drench for early life, one of the companies too, and again making really, really great progress. Manure treatment, that's something we're looking at. We've got a new initiative we'll be talking about more in a month on adoption of tools for farmers. And I can't say too much about it now, but it's really important that farmers can see things being used to build trust and confidence. So that's one of the whys behind that initiative. On genetics, we've got 2 different investments. Embryo is an Australian startup that are basically scaling embryo transfer to be the same as AI. So it looks, feels, costs the same as if you're doing AI, except you're getting 100% of the genetics in one go. What that means is you can significantly accelerate genetic gain. And that genetic gain can mean more efficient, lower emissions animals. We also have invested in some sheep genetics, and there'll be more that we'll be able to say about that in about a month. But there is actually today low methane sheep genetics available, but farmers don't quite have the trust and confidence and aren't kind of wanting to actually drive that through their flock at the levels that they could until they get the belief that, you know, they're not compromising on other traits. Thank you, Wim, 1 minute. And then adoption tech, what we're doing there is trying to find things that can deliver promising solutions out to pasture-based farms. So this could be water dosing systems, for example, things that aren't actually reachable into typical farming systems in a, you know, extensive hill country, for example. There is solution developers working in this space. And then Amua, who actually is early stage Canterbury startup, a wearable device that is to address, for us, the investment was about reducing nitrous oxide emissions. But you may be aware that a urine patch from a dairy cow was quite concentrated nitrogen source. Actually, imagine if you could spread that natural nitrogen out, you can get really good pasture growth, you can get less nitrous oxide emissions, and you can get significantly less leaching. So that's what that, and they've already done animal trials and looking super promising too. It's a farmer focus group. I saw Stu Taylor's name up there. He should be here, but he's obviously too busy on farm. But we do have a couple of Canterbury farmers on our farmer focus group. We meet with them online, but also 2 workshops per year in person with their startups to make sure that the tools we're investing in and looking at, we're taking into consideration the practical use on farm. Are they fit for purpose for New Zealand? So that's really, really key. And ultimately, please look on our website if you're interested or you want to sign up to our email list. We send out a quarterly email. We won't spam you, just really with that scorecard, which tells you what we've done, how much money we've spent and on what. And if you've got any questions, I'll be hanging around for the rest of the day too, or please just send me an email. Thanks, guys. Yes.
And don't worry, Ruth, we're going to ask you back at the end of the session for a Q&A session. Okay. So all the people that have questions from Ruth, hold on to them or write them on your little postcards and it will come. Next speaker is Ian. And, I've been watching Ian doing his work here at in one of the spaces here at the university where we had a co-working space, and he's working in artificial intelligence and looking at livestock management. Ian, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess AI in this audience is a bit overloaded. I probably should have said neural networks. So this is not our main sort of gig. It's a side project we've been working on since 2018. Basically wanting to predict live weight sheep change without having to bring them into the yards and weigh them. So can we do it remotely with them staying out in the paddock? Why would you want to do that? The main thing is that the farmers can know how much weight their sheep are putting on or losing. They can make some decisions about, you know, do they move them on to another paddock or do they give them some supplementary feed? Might also be able to detect some diseases, but yeah. So we've been working on this sort of a side project for about 2018. We've worked with Australian Wool Innovation, Meat Livestock Australia, New Zealand Merino, Fiji Vale, and the lead researchers at Murdoch University out in Perth. So it's sort of just been a research project so far, not really a commercially orientated project. The sort of steps we took to try it the first time was attach some accelerometers onto sheep. You sort of can't really get customized ones for sheep, so these are for human sleep studies. They're about $250 each, and we attached them to the sheep. We then wanted to know what the sheep were doing, what sort of behaviours, and the main ones we were interested in were grazing, ruminating, and then we just chucked everything else into another category. So if we knew what they were doing and then monitored them for a whole day and then a week, we could take that data and maybe train a transformer to tell us how much live weight change had been in that time. So those are the 4 steps we tried the first time. Yeah, so the poor old sheep had a halter on space with an accelerometer on it. We have tried ears, but if it's really windy, they blow around so much, you get a bad signal. Accelerometers are sampling at about 30 hertz, so we mainly looked at 10-second chunks. So that's sort of the acceleration traces you get for a sheep, and it's sort of walking from second 8 to 10. But so it's about 300 points on each line, so about 900 data points in all. So if we attach those to a whole bunch of sheep, Katie, how do I just click it and we'll go? Oh yeah, okay. So we had a few flocks. Well, Murdoch University did this part. So basically, put some numbers on the sheet, put accelerometers on them, get someone to video them, and then get someone to code what the sheep are doing. So we got hours and hours of these videos, sent them to Greece because we could hire students. Basically, Greece got whacked by the GFC, so we could get students super cheap. And they got to go through these and write down what each sheep was doing in 10-second chunks. That sort of data came out like this. It's a bit hard to see, but it's each line's a 10-second chunk of a particular sheep in a particular paddock, and they're saying what the sheep are doing, like what the behaviours are, how many steps. They gave us over 100,000 samples, so it's quite a big data set for this sort of thing. So then we take this data and we want it to tell us in that 10-second chunk what the sheep's actually doing. So this is a really small neural network. These are the sort of the networks that were designed in the 50s actually, but basically we get the acceleration data, we compact it down to 6 numbers, and then we train the neural network to tell us which of those 3 behaviours it was doing. We used another neural network to tell us what sort of numbers to put into it, but and here's the results. So that's the confusion matrix. So ideally, the diagonal ones would all be black and have a number of 1.0 in them. So this model was roughly 80% accurate in telling us what the sheep was doing. So then we had another experiment where a whole bunch of sheep we weighed them every day, measured how much they moved, how much they changed their weight. So we sort of had a ground truth on live weight change. And they also had accelerometers on them, so we got the data from the classifier, and now we could know for every 10-second chunk what the sheep was doing 24/7. So a day might look something like that, where it's grazing for a bit, ruminating, etc., etc. So for a single sheep, if we do that for 7 days, we sort of, and then add up the behaviours, you sort of get a behaviour time budget. Spend 8 hours doing ruminating or 10 hours grazing, and then for 7 days we know how much weight it gained or lost in that time. So that's a single data point for one sheep for 7 days, and we got a few hundred of these. Unfortunately, we didn't really have a neural network that was good at training from the stuff on the left to the stuff on the right. But then transformers came out in 2017. So that's the neural networks behind all the large language models that are out at the moment. And then this paper came out in December 2020, and it's using transformers to do multivariate time domain data, which is exactly the data format that we had. Luckily, these guys had a Git repository with all the code, so we just had to adapt it to our data and run it, and it ran. So this is the results. We had about 400 points for training and a bit over 100 for the test set. Ideally, that would be a really narrow, thin line to say we were just predicting the live weight change perfectly. It's not perfect. I mean, we got a bit of noise from the classifier being 20% out at times, but you can sort of see the trend. It's going upwards, and a larger data set would make a big difference. But as a proof of concept, it was sort of like, this roughly works. the problem is that people like putting devices on cattle and beef. They don't like putting them on sheep. Yeah, a $200 device like that could be worth more than the sheep is. Some farmers don't like putting a $2 RFID tag. And the other thing, putting devices on and off takes a lot of work. So using, this proved it sort of worked, but it's not a commercial, it's not a go commercially. So our main gig is land for dam matching with cameras. Here's a camera in someone's backyard, but it's basically a high-end security camera that can zoom out and identify sheep at about 100 meters, a whole bunch of solar panels, batteries, NVIDIA GPU, and a couple of computers. And the main purpose is land to dam matching. Here it is out in South Australia last year, connected to Starlink, and a couple on the back of the truck. So we're mainly doing land to dam matching, but we thought, can we use this camera system to do live weight change prediction, not on a sheep basis, but on a whole flock basis. And we've just started doing this year. The process is going to be slightly different. So we're going to train a sheep body landmark detector and then train a neural network to take its data to try and predict behaviour instead of accelerometers. And then the final two steps are pretty much the same, but we've only started the first step. So that's the sheep mark, landmarks on a sheep. There's about 4 data sets out on the internet for that at the moment. So we've grabbed one of them and we've trained it on some of the videos we had. It's pretty terrible. Hopefully the other 3 data sets will help. If they don't, we'll have to label our own. But that's sort of where we're at this point. So we'll finish this project in about a year's time. And not 100% sure it'll work, but yeah. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Very much looking at, we'll invite you back, Ian, for the Q&A as well. Thank you so much. So if you have any questions for Ian, and after the next speaker, we'll have the Q&A session. This is future stuff. Will it probably work in the future? I would say so. So hold that space. Google is our last and final speaker. And for the people that actually looked at the picture on the invitation, that is not Google. That's Jeff Brown, colleague of Google. And so we had the company right, we had the wrong person, but this is the real one. So thank you. I'm a bit lucky. Founder and CEO of Response Bio, and I'll give you the. Oh, it's already up there. There you go. The floor is yours.
Hi. Okay. The power of biology. Power of biology has been around in New Zealand for billions of years. Bacteria and fungus were the first things that came out of the ocean and crawled onto dry land. So we've decided to use those guys to be able to assist in agricultural processes that they've been involved in for millions and millions of years, and probably have it down to pat a lot better than what we think we can do. Just to sort of change a little bit of the receptors in everyone around the power of nature and the ability of nature that sometimes we take for granted. If we look at a 500 hectare dairy farm in the valley, and over a period of 3 or 4 days, they get 100 mils of rain. We can measure with science the amount of rain, the area, and everything that's gone on in that sort of discussion. But with nature, we look at it from a different lens. So science will tell you 100 mil over 500 hectares, there's been 500,000 tons of water drop. Nature will tell you that 500 tons of water floated in on a cloud and dispersed evenly amongst that landmass. So if we think like that, there's a lot of possibilities in being able to move water, but there's also a lot of abilities to be able to farm more in line with nature than against it. Okay, we use fungus and bacteria to rehabilitate soil, to make that soil richer and more alive. So it doesn't matter whether you take a grass seed, clover seed, or an apple tree. Those plants are going to grow a lot better because the soil has been adjusted and brought back to its full momentum and potential. We're using nitrogen-fixing bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi. We use that in different combinations with different types of plants. If you looked at plants like children, they've all got a different identity, they've all got a different requirement, and they all have a different expression or a different opinion. So each plant needs a different type of fungal connection and a different amount of bacteria to support that connection. Sorry, I've confused it. We've done 4 years worth of trials at Fonterra and Paihiatua, testing our products out on a wastewater farm. That farm was very complicated because not only it got wastewater from the dairy farm, but it also got to deal with all the effluent and wastewater from the dairy factory. So there was a lot of different types of compounds being regularly spread over the whole platform throughout the year. In the first year, I can use this. I can't. Okay, I think my finger's too big. In the first year, our respondent multi-species grew significantly more dry matter over the year. But when we look at other parameters like nitrogen uptake and phosphorus uptake, there was a big increase in the amount of nitrogen we were able to remove from the platform. We don't use any synthetic nitrogen within any of our growing solutions because the bacteria that we use fix enough nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it into the ground to be able to support the plants and support the platforms and the apples and whatever's growing. In the second year, you can see that the biology was multiplying. So it was getting stronger and stronger. There was more of it. It could remove more of the contaminants, whether it's the phosphorus or the nitrogen. It increased in its momentum because with the biology, in light of, say, in comparison to urea, we're not spreading a granule that dissolves and needs reapplying. We're installing a network that multiplies. So along with the time frames and everything on the trials that we've been able to do, we can establish that not only does the biology expand and multiply, but it also removes a lot more of the problems underneath the ground while still growing more dry matter for farming. We use a seed drill to be able to put the seed and apply the biology all in one pass. So we're targeting cost of production for farmers. Being able to do something once but cover a lot of different areas at the same time is reducing the cost that farmers are having to do. One application of our biology in the ground with the seed will last up to 6 years. We're getting, that graph. The updated 4-year content of what we were doing is showing that we're able to grow and get the paddocks up to momentum to be able to grow 20 tonnes of dry matter per year without applying any nitrogen whatsoever within the growing season, which was reducing a lot of costs. You know, the cost of production reduced the nitrogen, but we were able to increase the nitrogen uptake 675 kilos of N and over 100 kilos of phosphorus per hectare right the way across the farm. So the environmental aspect about not having to put nitrogen on, but also being able to utilise everything we've got into the ground to produce more dry matter. So it's quite succinct that one application is being able to complete many requirements down the line, looking at new age farming with reduced inputs. Our North Island trial conclusions was we were being able to maintain a high rate of dry matter production. We were being able to grow 20 tonnes of dry matter without any synthetic N being applied. On that platform, there was about 100 kilos of N going on. So great for effluent blocks as far as compliance with local body requirements and farmers not having to worry about their emissions. All of the effluent gets sprayed onto the ground, and our biology actually takes that effluent as a problem and turns it into a solution. We did quite a lot this year in Selwyn. We've got an A2 Australia trial on Cold Track Road on the Dewhurst farms, and we added another dimension about being able to monitor and watch how our biology can grow in soil and what sort of timeframes that we were having to work around on it. We used soil eDNA, so it's a DNA appraisal of what we've been able to grow into the soil. So our Respond Bio and the multi-species plant mix that we put into the ground was tested and showed over 2,000 reads of live biology into the ground. Our plant mix only, without the biology being applied to it, only showed 241, and the Dewhurst seed mix by itself showed 175. The nitrogen cycling and leaching risk on the multi-species responded live showed a huge reduction in nitrogen left in the soil, proving that the plants were being uptake through the mycorrhizal fungi into the plants, turning it into the dry matter, whereas all the way over to the cultivated land that was just planted with a seed mix without any biology, it ended up being very highly bacterial dominated, which is reducing the ability to be able for the plants to be able to remove those contaminants that are in the ground. So it's showing us that the biology was able to perform that in a very quick manner. The great thing about what we were able to look with this DNA is to be able to see a balance. With everything in nature, there's good things and there's bad things, and we utilize both of them. And you can see on the left-hand column there, the live biology here was being able to grow more of the bad biology. And the bad biology are the protozoa that actually eat the bacteria. So the process of nitrifying bacteria is the ones we choose are free range and they breathe a lot of oxygen. When they breathe the oxygen, they extract the nitrogen from the oxygen that we breathe. And the protozoa, when they eat the bacteria, when they have a bodily function, they've digested the bacteria, they remove the nitrogen content of that bacteria, and it comes out their back end, and it comes into being able to produce the most amount of nitrogen available for the mycorrhizal fungi to be able to transport to the plant in a symbiotic relationship. So at a snapshot of what we were able to be able to do, this is the Dewhurst seed mix by itself without any biology, and their legacy singles only. So that was a paddock that was cultivated. So those legacy signals are actually dead biology. They're there, they're showing up, but they're not active. In our mix that had the plant species mix only, we saw some, there's no AMF reads, but we saw some biological action in the top 150 mils. And that was probably because most seeds that we see on the market now have some history or have some biological association in the seed development through the plant. So there's a macro amount, but that's about where it gets to. Whereas when we added our live biology with the plant species, we got down to 600 millimeters, and these tests were taken 2 weeks after planting. So within 14 days, our biology was not only be able to start cycling, but it moved through the soil column down to 600 mil. Now, that's a really decent chunk of soil to be able to create a fungal filter. So anything that's going on to the surface, like the cow's excrement, the wee, everything that's going on there, is having to work its way through that filter before it gets down to any form of leaching. We've got a lot of other material on board that we can make confident conclusions about the gradient of reduction of nitrogen and other things that we can look at through that sort of filtration process. We're panning around the paddock. This was planted, so this has been grazed 3 times since early December. So it's phenomenal production. Farmers are like super happy. But when we get down into the platform and you look down through the canopy and we look onto the ground, you'll be able to see what we do. And this is our fungus and bacteria that's on the surface of the soil, but it's growing right the way across the platform. And that's the engine room to this type of change. So we put the biology in with the seed, we plant it once, we get this sort of performance over a 6-year period. So far, that's what we've watched. And a number of things change. The cows milk better. Paddocks where farmers have been getting 3 grazings with their herd a year turn into having 6 grazings in the year, because the biology is providing more stimulant and nutrient into the plants, which is being passed to the cows. So rather than vaccinating cows with seaweeds and stuff like that to be able to lower methane emissions and nitrate in the cow feed, we put it in the soil, and the biology synthesizes those elements into the feed, and then the cows eat it. So it's another cost of a reduction in cost of production for farmers when you just have it in the soil and the plants uplift it and deliver it to the cows. There's no vaccinating, there's no drenching, there's nothing like that. We're being able to put these elements into the feed, correct the feed, and increase that bionutrient to be able to pass it into the cow. And then the cow puts that nutrient into the milk. So the milk's climbing to a new level. The information that we've seen so far shows that all of those things are heading in the right direction. And the confident conclusions we have around that show that by being able to look at obstacles as stepping stones, we've been able to look at things from a different direction so we can come up with better solutions for some greater outcomes for farming. Thank you.
You got Ian, Ruth, am I allowed to ask you up for a short Q&A? I think, ladies and gents, what we saw here is yeah. What we saw here is a snapshot of technologies that are available or that could be available. We looked at really cool technologies that a consortium, a group of people is actually coming together, asked the government to actually put some funding against that, and then we're basically activating the world to come up with technologies. We've learned about with Ian that we can actually use computers to learn about our problems and hopefully come up with some really cool suggestions. And we learned from Google that sometimes it is really good to let nature do its thing as well. Any questions from the floor?
I have a quick question for Ruth. It's amazing hearing the different technologies and the research and development that's going on. I'm just wondering, in terms of when either farmers on their own farm are looking to then perhaps measure their emissions, how will they be able to factor in some of these new technologies? Will there be emissions factors, if you like, to use MPI language, that factors in lower emitting livestock, or how would that sort of work?
Very, very good question. Oh, that's loud. I'll hold it over. Really good question, but you can imagine, given the investment names, it's quite a focus making sure the things that we get commercial count in the national inventory. And so what we have been doing, what is in flight now, is protocols for the mitigation and pollution in farm emissions model, which is an LCA model, which is feeding into all of the on-path calculators. So last year, MPI released the first version of this emissions model with specific protocols have been developed so far for things like EcoPond, low methane sheep units, now the bolus. So they've done that ahead of the commercialisation of the ruminant bolus. They've also met with all of the companies in our folio, as well as others that may not be investments we've made, to make sure that before they enter the market, that they have a protocol that can be included as soon as possible, so it can get through the farming model, which back into the free into the ex-farm, then into the national inventory, so it affects our country's use as well.
Thank you very much. Any more questions in the room? Sorry.
The question for the panel really is, these tools are all commendable and we know that they have place. It is unlikely that any single tool will be the silver bullet to solve the problem. Have you considered evaluating these tools in a context where the system actually changes from a pure pastoral system to, say, integrating different arable feeds, for example, into the system where you have a more balanced diet, and then applying these tools across it to see how they work?
I think with most farmers, it comes down to price of product, how much it's going to cost them to get X amount of litres out of the cows. But if we share data and everyone starts working on the same objective principles, then there could be feedstocks grown in New Zealand specifically for New Zealand cows.
Yeah, I guess our mandate at Net Zero is to try and find tools for the current farming system, acknowledging that quite a few of the investments we've made are into things that we deploy improving. And so those will be consumed by health access to shed feeding predominantly, potentially feed pads, mixer wagons, kind of thing, to the women as well. And that's quite a clear sort of directive from our investors that we do want to maintain that pasture-based advantage, competitive advantage as well. But let's take the learnings, and particularly the emissions learnings from what different feeding regimes can do, and that's, I guess, led to some of the research and then resulted in by Lubeck, for example, with the higher limits right across. But there is a lot of work that's yet to be still done on whether these solutions are commercialised, on the stacking of these solutions and their use in the different types of farm systems as well, and how does that affect performance in that, because in particular.
Thank you so much. I want to have a last question here because I have this thing about ending on time, and but I'm sure that some of you can stick around if we want to talk to us.
How do we ensure that the early adopter gets to take advantage of whatever the outcome is? And I'll use the example, my overseer data for 17 years says I have a 17% reduction in greenhouse gases. Fonterra says, but we will take it from X. So I only gain 2/3 of the advantage. So my question, why would I be an early adopter if I don't get the advantage from it? How do we ensure that future innovation and outcomes are actually given effect to my advantage, or don't disadvantage me for being an early adopter? How do we manage that?
I actually love that question because you're obviously really adopter focused on improving your practice. And I think we have to, in light of the context we're in New Zealand right now, particularly the policy context, a farmer might rightly say, what is the benefit for me personally of adopting a new mitigation technology if the reductions are not necessarily rewarded or monetised for me? And so we are actively working on some new initiatives on space with our investors to ensure that the benefit for a farmer stacks for being early adopters specifically. So those first 10 to 50% of farmers who are willing to give things a go. We know one of the most important things is that FOMO you can create by letting over the fence, and you may be seeing that you're doing something new and interesting and sustainable as well. So we want to create FOMO, build trust and confidence, but also give the financial reward to farmers. So there is incentive schemes in place now, and you might need to put some of them through criteria, so they those some of the earliest tranche those incentive schemes. What we need to be able to do is make it more material what scale those incentives can be and what they need to be to drive scale uptake across New Zealand and maintain a competitive advantage of sustainability.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And please join me in thanking you. So we're almost at an end. And so now it comes to Mike. What is happening next, Mike?
First, I want to take the opportunity to really thank you all for coming today. All the time you've spent with us and all your contributions and from the whole research team. It was such a great outcome, great turnout. And so what happens next? So what we're going to do, I collected all the workshop sheets. We'll go back into my office in hopefully a few days, analyzing, aggregating it up, and put it into the report as well, and then send it off to the council. And as Wim said this morning as well, it will be all publicly available on the council website once it's approved. And yes, then you can see the result. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. So yeah, everything will be available, and we'll make sure that we'll let the voice of the food and fibre sector in Selwyn be heard within council. Before I hand back to Alana to do a karaoke and stuff, I want to thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for sticking with us. Thank you so much, Selwyn District Council, for initiating this. Thank you so much for the research team that actually pulls this together. And thank you as audience very much for being here and contributing, not only in your interviews, but also in this afternoon. I hope you had a fun day, and we'll hand over to Alana.
Okay, how are you feeling? Okay, I put up the wrong karakia for our closing karakia at the end, so sorry, I'm just going to have to listen and enjoy the final karakia, because I can't get you to join in with me. Obviously, you can join in at the end. So our final karakia is kia tau iho, and it's a karakia that asks that the clarity that we have found together today, or at least the journey towards clarity that we have found together today, stays with us, so that our thinking, our words, our care for each other, and our shared sense of purpose carry forward beyond this room into where you go next in your day and your week and your month, and with the research project, and where the council goes next with the work that we've done here today. Kia tau e fō te mana ki tika o te wahi nāpro. Ki ruka, ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia te hua ma kihi. Toi te whakaaro, toi te kupu, toi te aroha, toi te mana takata e. Māori ora. Koe hui e. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.